As a civilian, I'm a math teacher. My first master's was in education with an emphasis in mathematics. In the Air Force, I earned a master's of military operational art and science from the Air Command and Staff College at Air University. I was also sent to the highest level course for cyber professionals in the Air Force, Cyber 300 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where the Air Force Institute of Technology is. I had the benefit of having experience both in airspace and cyberspace in the Air Force. 3 of my last operational assignments were in cyberspace. And I was also a trained targeteer. And Representative Behringer, what you said earlier about those vulnerabilities are certainly true to our infrastructure. But I would also include that elections are just as ripe of a target. And so please pardon me if I pause, because I can't get into the classified realm, and that's where I lived for 26 years. So I want to make sure that I
can't hear it on this one. Am I the only one having that issue?
Government and our people, and what I've said I will or will not reveal. But please know that all of us, we don't know what we don't know. Can everybody agree? We don't know what we don't know. I know enough to know how much I don't know in the cyber world. But based on my training and experience, I would say that I'm a cyber...
Debbie, can you hear anything?
Based on the training and experience that I've had.
I can't.
So
I'm just wondering if I'm the only one, if it's something on my end, or...
Supposedly 37 terabytes of evidence that was presented at the Cyber Symposium.
I have different sources of audio. I need to pick the right one.
I started off being very skeptical. You're going to have to, show me state, right? Prove this.
Let me see if I can fix it.
And as a math teacher and a cyber warfare professional, I'm convinced that if that
okay,
data
thank
is
you.
legitimate.
By the way, I'm streaming it onto YouTube as well.
Oh, great.
What they have are packet captures, so that's a point-to-point in real time.
Let me give that to you so
Internet
you
protocol
have
address
it
to another one
in the
that
channel.
says who has come in, where they're going, and what they have done. They also have electronic recordings in real time, both before, during, and after the election. Ladies and gentlemen, the issue is not our county clerks. It's not our Secretary of State. Okay? I'm convinced that Missouri and the United States of America suffered the greatest cyber attack in the history of the world that was ordered and orchestrated by the Chinese Communist Party. I cannot tell you all the reasons why I believe that. But if you please take my word based on my experience, it's totally consistent with how they operate. And the whole point is for us to not know that they did it. Let me say that again. The whole point is for them to not know that we did it. It's not the software companies. This is a foreign power trying to disenfranchise every single voter in the United States. Now, how did they do it? The key attack point was county level. Not the state level, not the precinct level, not the voting machines. Right? If you do it at the county level, and you can put in an algorithm, which Dr. Douglas Frank has shown in multiple states. I think he said he's completed 13 states, and he's found the algorithm is consistent within each state, but a little bit different as you go from state to state. He's finished 13 states. He's working on data for another 30 states. One of my takeaways is I would strongly encourage you to invite him to testify at the September 14th meeting, Dr. Douglas Frank. How do they attack, right? They took 2010 census data because the 2020 had not been released. You extrapolate it 10 years forward, so everybody's 10 years older, take account for mortality, and now you have estimated population for 2020. Now you put in, for each age from 18 to 100, so it's 83 different numbers, you put in what are the percentage of registered voters. But you put in an incredibly high number, close to 100%. In the first county you looked at, it was just under 98% of population of registered voters. Now, Representative McGaugh, I know, have you ever seen a county where 98% of the population are registered voters? seems incredibly high, and that's what voter experts told him. Why do they do that? Well, then you can control the number of ballots. What you're doing is creating an excess of ballots, and the local people who are running the elections don't even know, and it doesn't affect the real, actually cast votes. You're creating extra phantom ballots that you can then go in and fill in the blanks. And then even on the back end, find out who legitimately lives in the district and plug it into people who didn't vote. Okay? But you would not know this. And oh, by the way, because they're doing it at the county election, county level, as reported to the state, all the numbers. And that's what voter experts told him. What's even worse than this is they have the ability to flip votes. Then when you flip votes, it's not just flipping for president. What you're doing is creating an excess of ballots. And every flip, the local people who are running gives you a magnitude of 2. And it doesn't affect. So if you flip one vote for Robert and he loses the vote and John gets the vote, it's actually a 2-vote difference. Okay? So they haven't gone through all the 37 terabytes of data yet, but what they have gone through, 3,009 counties in the United States were victims of cyber attacks out of 3,242. And that includes county equivalences like parishes in Louisiana, and what they call them in Alaska is different, and independent cities like St. Louis City. I think Virginia has 40-something independent cities. So everything that's a county equivalent, I believe that's about 93%, but again, they haven't finished going through the data. I don't think you can overstate that if this attack that the evidence shows, then the Chinese Communist Party determined who won in the November 20 elections at the county level throughout the United States. And we didn't know, we weren't any the wiser. Okay? It's not that any votes weren't counted, it's that votes were added, votes were flipped. And we're talking about vulnerabilities. And I appreciate your example of saying, you know, when I let somebody come in and do the software update, they have the ability, cyber hackers have the ability to go in without you knowing. Part of these packet captures show how did the attacker get in. Many times they had credentials, login and password. Many times they were able to hack the firewall and get through the firewall to go in and manipulate data. And the whole point is for us to not know what they did. So I didn't want to just read my testimony, but if you look at it, they had to have access both before, during, and after the election. Okay, before the election, you got to put the algorithm on. Okay, during the election, you're seeing what's happening real time. Are the numbers showing up the way we want them to? And then you can manipulate voters and votes and actually flip votes. Well, after the election, you have to clean up after yourself. You can get rid of those phantom voters. That's why you're seeing gaps on machine. And I don't think this is one specific machine or company, and I'm not even sure that they're involved. But 66% of the internet traffic that attacked us was from China. The other third was from different parts of the world. We don't know that, and I haven't been able to look at the data to that degree. You think of all that's going on in our country, what's going on in Afghanistan, what's going on at the border, the spending in Washington, COVID, all these other things. Underneath is a much bigger attack that dwarfs 9/11 or Pearl Harbor. When 9/11 happened, as an intelligence professional, I said what changed was the American public's understanding and awareness that people wanted to kill us simply because we were citizens of the United States of America. That was not new in 2001. You can go back to 1979 with the takeover of the Iranian embassy. 1981, bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon. The 2 attacks on the embassies in Africa. The USS Cole, the first attack on the World Trade Center. None of that was new. These people hated us and wanted to kill us, but it wasn't until 9/11 that the American public understood the depth of that hatred and the extent of the threat. This threat is much greater. if the Chinese can go in and do this with cyber through
Sorry,
these
couldn't
cyber
get my microphone
attacks, we
off.
could never have another fair
No,
and
I
free
still
election.
can't hear it. I don't know.
And
I mean, I can see it
I'll
fine.
give you some of my recommendations here at the end, but I certainly want to take any of your questions. But here are my recommendations. Let's get the evidence that applies to Missouri
Well,
and
maybe
invite Dr. Frank to testify.
I just had
Look
it
at the
brought up on the
evidence.
web.
Was
I
there an
didn't go to the
algorithm used in
YouTube.
Missouri? And what
You
I
want me
mean
to
by
check that
algorithm,
out?
he can figure out the algorithm from a couple of counties and predict how
Okay.
many votes and how many registered voters in every other
Okay,
county
great.
in the
That would be
state.
fantastic.
If that's there, that's not natural. That is evidence of a cyber.
Right.
Were
Okay.
votes flipped in Missouri? At the
Okay.
symposium, they showed 59,698 votes
Of
flipped in
course.
Missouri, which then
Okay,
has a
I'll
double
check
effect.
that and let you know.
That went all the way down to school board elections. This wasn't just president and Congress and Senate, it's state elections, local
Okay.
elections. If the evidence is there, if y'all find that the evidence is true, spread the word, because the American people need to know the truth, because this is bigger than anything else that's going on in our country right now. Definitely get the Secretary of State involved. If this is true, we need to get with other states, go to the Supreme Court, and have real elections. Finally, I would say get rid of the machines. It's not just the voting machines. It's the machine that the county clerk is using to transfer that data to the state. If they change it there, it doesn't matter what happened in all the voting machines. They could all work correctly and have reported correctly. But if you can change the data at the county level, and that's what gets reported to the Secretary of State, that's actually your biggest vulnerability. So I'm sure there's more to discuss, but I'd love to take your questions at this time. And thank you.
Mr. Stevens, thank you very much. I'll let some of the committee go. Representative McGaugh, please.
Thank you, sir. To inquire.
Proceed.
Thank you for coming before this committee, and I appreciate also the written document that you left, because it's easier for me to follow along. Before I end my inquiry, I need to address something I said earlier in testimony that I absolutely need to correct. But first, I want to ask you if you are aware of the hand recount that is required to be done by every election authority after the election. The hand recount of the paper ballots.
In Missouri?
Yes.
I was not aware of that, but I'm very glad to hear that.
Okay. So with all your
yes, it's working. It's on YouTube.
Cybersecurity
It's working
type
fine.
Knowledge, do you not think that probably
Okay.
since the clerks and the election boards are required by
Okay, well, I
statute to do
appreciate
that,
all of
something
this.
would be
You're
found
doing a great job.
with this flipping of vote situation? Would they not find that?
It all depends on when it happens and whether or not the data
Perfect.
was
Okay.
changed back to the
Okay,
correct
great.
data.
Thank
You know,
you.
you talked about it's 2 weeks before you certify. Well, if within that window, after things had been counted, you could go back and change it back to the real numbers and what it was supposed to be.
Oh, great.
That's why I said,
yes.
let's go look
That
at
would
the
be-
evidence. I
that
haven't
would
got to look
be-
at the evidence firsthand, but I'm just saying what was presented based on
Yeah,
my
I
experience.
prefer Rumble
credible.
if that's
And-
doable.
but I'm not saying, oh yeah,
Just
go out and
because-
listen to these people, they're right. I don't think this is a partisan issue. I think this is a citizen issue.
Okay.
No, I appreciate that.
And I appreciate what you're saying, and I think if we
darn.
went back to the
Okay.
paper ballots and counting it, and not even reporting it
Yeah.
on a computer.
Okay. Well,
Have your precincts take the
I'll
tally
talk to the
your
other
county. Have
admins
somebody
and
from the county
we'll
take it to
figure
the state. Now
see what
there's
we want
no
to do then.
cyber issue, and I know that would be
Okay.
very hard in
Yeah.
counties to have a whole lot of people,
Right.
but
Well, and that was number 5 of your suggestions, and I personally could not accept that. I don't think we can go back
What's
to the
that?
Pony Express days for sure. And I also think
Okay,
that
well, then we'll hush.
because these DREs
Thanks
have
again.
already been
Okay, great.
addressed in the state, and the last time we met
Bye.
as a committee, we were told that there were only, I think, 3 or 4 counties left in Missouri that had the DREs, and they were on the list to, they were taking bids for the paper ballot system. So my other question is, do you know, and we don't have to name names, we don't want to give them free advertisement, but do you know how many of these voting system and election-related businesses are here in Missouri that provide these services to the clerks?
No, I have not done that research.
Okay.
I think I believe you said 4 different companies, so you
Right.
would know better than I.
And I've been out for a few years, so there could be more that have come. But the part that I need to correct, and I see Representative Kelly's gone, and that doesn't make a difference. My great clerk friends have real-timed me that of the systems that they have out within the counties, none of them have modems. Not one of them have modems. What I was remembering in my county was our financial system. When we needed a fix, we could let them in on that modem. So I apologize for that mistake. Not the first one I made today. So the way in which, if the clerk or the board finds a mistake when they proof and get their ballots, is they get a whole nother compact flash card. They use the flash drive on the laptop. The laptop has no modem.
So the laptop cannot be connected to the internet by Wi-Fi?
That is correct.
There's
sure
no Ethernet cable?
You're going to have to add, the next witness is a county clerk from a large jurisdiction. So I'm sure he's been listening intently, and he's going to address that, I'm pretty sure. So
Here's my question, ma'am. How does
Yes.
the information get from the county to the state? Does it not travel over the internet?
it's keyed into the system that is provided by the Secretary of State's office that also includes the voter registration information.
Okay.
So they have,
And what I would say to you, I think that is the most likely point of attack without having the specific information. And that's why I say, let's get the evidence and see. All you have to do is see if the algorithm works. If the algorithm works, this is credible because he can predict without knowing based on these numbers. That doesn't take a forensic audit. That's easy. That's one guy to say, come in, can you look at this? Did it happen? If not, say, okay, Colonel Stevens, you don't know what you're talking about. All right? It's not reliable.
okay. Well, I appreciate that, and that you're open to what it is that we have to deal with. And one last thing then is, I know that the county clerk getting ready to testify is going to talk to you about what they would like to have, what's called the risk limiting audit. And that further ensures the results are correct. And if not, more hand counts. Because right now, they have to choose one precinct. Excuse me. It was only one in my county. Here again, I'm small. A certain percentage, and he'll tell you, of the precincts that matches what the statute says, and they have to recount. So the number they put in on election night, we all know is unofficial. And that's why nobody,
Right.
unless it's a large margin, has a victory party, because it could change. So with your theory, or what you've testified
Based
to,
on the evidence
based
that
on
they
the
have
evidence,
shown, yes. Which
the
may
numbers,
or may not be true.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
The numbers that Missouri entered into the computer on election night came from the results from the precincts with their individual flashcards that were decimated together for a total. Right. Then they go into the board of verification and their recounts. So if that number that they turned in on election night to the Secretary of State's office changes by this large percent on this flipping or however, then I am with absolute 100% assure you that there would be hand counts all over the state. Right. We've done that before on close elections, the 1%, now 0.5%, and I appreciate your time. This is interesting to me. I'm not saying it's not happening in other states. I'm from the show me state, and I would need to absolutely be shown and have to be there to see it, to see how these were flipped. I have total confidence in the election authorities.
I agree, and that's why my first recommendation is let's get this evidence or get someone who's more of an expert and who has dealt with this evidence to come and testify.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Representative Wyndham, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. Was it Colonel Stevens?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here, Colonel, and thank you for your service. So,
Thank you.
I asked earlier if the Department of Homeland Security would be considered experts. Would you say that the Department of Homeland Security that conducts, let me see what kind of audit it is here. So the Department of Homeland Security conducts a penetration testing and vulnerability assessment on St. Louis County. Do you think the folks that conduct that are qualified and certified?
I don't know who they are. I'm not familiar with the cyber arm of the Department of Homeland Security. I know that the only part of the Department of Homeland Security that would be tied into the military would be the Coast Guard in an emergency, but they are primarily law enforcement. So I would want to know, do the personnel on that cyber team who are doing it, have they dealt with classified networks, protecting and defending classified networks? Are they ethical hackers? You know, so I would want to know what their experience is. I would hope that the answer is yes, but I do not have enough information to answer one way or the other.
Okay, you say you would hope. So here's the thing.
Yes.
The Department of Homeland Security, like, hired these people, so they would trust that they're qualified, right? So if the Department of Homeland Security trusts these folks that they're qualified for this, because that's part of the same, you know.
Right, but they're not experts they're not experts in cyber warfare. They don't have access to classified information to know what the threat is or what the tactics, techniques, and procedures of the threat would be or their capabilities would be. That would be the downside of going with the Department of Homeland Security versus Department of Defense agencies where that is their expertise. I would feel much more comfortable and confident if that's who had conducted it. Does that make sense?
Not really.
Okay.
I would think that if you're part of the United States military, you would trust all branches of the military to hire equipped, qualified, and certified people to do a job. You wouldn't think that folks, they would hire someone with
no. Here's what I'm talking about.
Experience to do a job that they're going to go out and do, right? Like maybe if you're hiring an intern, but not if you're hiring somebody to go out and do penetration checks on election systems, then you don't hire an intern.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Why I have a different perspective is because I had a top secret special compartmented information clearance, and I was read into certain areas. There's way more areas I was never read into and didn't know what was going on because I didn't have a need to know. So many times the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing, does not know the capabilities. And what I'm saying is I believe the Department of Homeland Security would be limited based on the information and intelligence and expertise they have compared to other combat support agencies within the Department of Defense who have much more knowledge and understanding of both capabilities and intent of foreign actors. This is not a U.S. citizen issue. This is an attack by a foreign government through people that they ordered and orchestrated. So I would not expect the Homeland Security to have that expertise to be able to answer those type of questions. I would expect them to have expertise in cyber and cyber defense from a public civilian perspective, but not from a military type level. Does that make sense? I trust them to be able to do what they can do, but they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, I
remember
get
that principle?
I get you don't know what you don't know, and I think that's why some of the members of this committee have trouble relating to me on how this can get dangerous and spreading information that we don't know is true. But I will. You said Dr. Douglas Frank?
Yes, sir. And I put a link on there of his presentation. It's about 40 minutes from day one of the Cyber Symposium. And of all the videos I've looked at, it's probably the most succinct and can pull together what they're saying, what they think they've found in the 37 terabytes of data.
Are you aware of the organization PolitiFact?
I am not, sir.
Okay, so PolitiFact is a nonprofit organization that basically goes around saying if statements are true or false, and there's kind of like a scale in between there. The lowest ranking for PolitiFact is Pants on Fire, and Douglas Frank has one review from PolitiFact, and it's Pants on Fire.
And my question is, who checks PolitiFact?
Well, I don't have a question for that, or an answer for that. However,
Well, that would be my question because I don't know who they are.
Okay.
I don't know what their interests are
well, I don't know
or their
who
concerns, but
who necessarily checks PolitiFact.
But I have no doubt that people who are politically motivated would rank him that way, as opposed to actually looking at the science and the data.
Okay, so you think that that's politically motivated? Okay.
Yes, sir. And that is part of their name, right?
PolitiFact?
PolitiFact. So obviously they're dealing with politics.
Okay. So are you aware that the amount of ballots that are printed is based on how many voters voted the last time around?
No, sir.
Okay.
I am not an expert in Missouri elections.
Okay. So you also said that it would be like a trickle-down effect, right? If it happened on the presidential level, votes are being flipped all down the ballot, all the way down the school
If
board.
votes were flipped, they would not just flip the presidential one, like say someone voted for Joe Biden and primarily voted Democrat. If they flipped that vote, they wouldn't just change it to Trump. They would flip it all the way down the ticket.
All the way down the ticket.
Right. So it would have a double effect for every one of those ballots if ballots were actually flipped. That's what they're saying the evidence showed. I have not seen that evidence, but again, I think the algorithm is much more easy to come in and see where we attacked.
And you said
you can show that easier.
And you said you think they did it like every county, one county at a time, right, throughout the country.
So the data they've gone through, they said so far 3,009 counties, they either have packet captures of IP to IP attacks or electronic surveillance showing that activity. So that's the vast majority of county or county equivalents in the United States, and they said they had not finished going through the data.
You lost me a little bit there. So
sorry.
That was, I'm looking at the sheet that you gave us here. You said 3,242 counties?
County or county equivalents.
Okay, so.
Which would include like St. Louis City would be a county equivalent.
And they did almost all of those counties? They did over 3,000 of the 3,000?
Right, they haven't finished going through the 37 terabytes of data, but what they've gone through so far, they have found attacks on 3,009, or incursions, however you want to call it, but cyber traffic primarily at the county level.
Okay, so they're going all the way down the ballot, and school boards don't do partisan elections. They don't do Democrat, Republican.
It depends on the state. I don't know if you're familiar with Antrim County in Michigan.
I'm just talking about Missouri.
Right, but the reason they went to started lawsuits in that county because the school board election, the results were not what they voted for. People are talking, who'd you vote for? Who'd you vote for? No, this is not right. So my whole point is it was a local election that triggered something was wrong here.
Yeah, I think, is Michigan the state where the Senate Republicans did a report and said it was nothing wrong with their election?
I do not know, sir.
I think it was.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm getting at is if Missouri, I'm getting from you is that Missouri was hacked, right? Or it's questions that Missouri was hacked.
Based on this evidence, every state in the country was hacked, and 3,009 counties within the United States were
attacked. Can you
attacked.
point to any Missouri elections where it looks like the election were hacked?
And that's why I say I believe you should invite Dr. Frank to come and testify.
Well, I'm just
'cause
saying
he's
the
looked at
results.
He's looked at the data. I have not.
Well, I'm just
I don't
saying,
have access to the data.
from
So
the
go
results,
to the expert who's looked at it.
Donald Trump won by like 17 points, right? Donald Trump won Missouri by 17 points.
I'm
this
not
time
sure,
around?
sir.
Okay, you don't know
No.
how much anybody.
I'm
in
not
Missouri
here
won.
representing a party. I'm here to protect the interests of every American registered voter.
Well, I'm just
And
saying,
Missouri specifically.
there are Democratic state representatives that won in close races,
Mm-hmm.
but Trump won by 15. That's like a big variance if they flipped every single race. Like if they went Democrat all the way down.
Well, again,
then Trish Gumby, I'll just point her out,
Right.
wouldn't have won.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just
close
saying
race.
that the numbers that they're showing are just under 60,000 and just under 120,000 impact. I don't know where those votes were, which counties, which races, but if that's true, it could potentially change the results of those elections.
Okay, so these were pretty smart folks that was like, we're going to leave that Trish Gumby race alone, or we'll leave that.
Let's not bring specific representative races into this. I think that would be
Well, it just
inappropriate to do this, to suggest you're talking about fear-mongering. I wouldn't want to suggest that one race was affected. I would ask that we look at the data and let someone else tell us. I don't feel comfortable suggesting one race was rigged or manipulated over one or the other. I'm just trying to help you, Representative.
Okay.
I don't want to start another firestorm. They got enough video already, I think, from us this morning.
So this will be my last question. I'll wrap it
Okay.
up. So if the president won by X%, then wouldn't it be like the same number for everybody won by if they're flipping every single?
No, it all depends on which votes were flipped and where they were flipped. So it wouldn't affect everywhere.
Okay.
You'd have to know what were the almost 60,000 votes that were flipped, where were they flipped.
Okay.
But something you said, sir, is very true. These are very smart folks, okay? When Dr. Frank went to Colorado and looked at all the counties, there was one data where the algorithm didn't work. And he went back and looked at it, and that's because the majority of people in that county are incarcerated. So the numbers were way down from ages 20 to 50 because they were in prison and not eligible to vote. They had actually taken that into account, changed the algorithm on that one specific county so it would not be a red flag.
Okay. Well, okay. You have to be more than smart. You have to be smart, intentional, well-resourced, all those things.
Intentional and have no morals.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and-
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I'll close. Thank you very much for being here today. You said you were nonpartisan. Would these, if these activities took place, would it just benefit one party or the other party? Or, I mean, you're suggesting the Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party.
Communist Party, right.
They didn't really care on some of these, whether it was Republican or Democrat. They were just, I mean, it didn't
I
just
think they
benefit
were-
the Republicans or the Democrats.
I think they were attacking the big picture and putting who they wanted in office at whatever level. You know, it was
So
at
at
a
some
state-by-state
points-
basis. You know, here's what's hard. You remember what I said, the example about 9/11?
Right,
China has been attacking us in cyberspace for who knows how long.
right.
Just most Americans aren't aware of it. I think we can say that at the unclassed level, right? So they have a lot of expertise and they have a lot of resources to put toward that. I think what was presented in the symposium was partisan. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because I'm concerned that if they can do this, you know, cyber attack is the greatest threat to our elections, in my opinion.
Well, I thank you for being here today.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Simmons. Just so you all know, the hard stop at 12:30 is gone and disappeared, and it no longer exists. If anybody was really questioning whether we were going to be done by 12:30, it's not going to happen. We've been cleared to fly. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a clarity and an opinion from the witness on a couple of your bullet points, and you talked about a credit line of phantom voters. And so I was always curious, and you know, I'm in my mid-50s, so I've watched a lot of presidential elections ever since I was a teenager and always had interest. I've never seen counting stop on election night, and I don't know how many, 8, 9, 10 elections I've observed. I've never seen that. Representative Adams, I know you're probably a little bit maybe my senior. Have you ever seen an election, on a presidential election, votes counting stop in any state? That's probably a pretty simple answer.
No, it isn't, because it may have happened someplace where they have stopped counting for a variety of reasons to pick up later. But normally it does not.
Not on the level that. So I guess my question, you're giving an opinion, is that credit line of phantom voters? You know, I've heard conjecture that they were busting this algorithm that maybe the CCP was trying to set up, and that the system was kind of overwhelmed, and so they had to kind of stop and reconfigure. I mean, I know that's just kind of what I've heard. I don't know what's true, what's not true. I just want to get your opinion connected to that line.
So to have a phantom voter, you still have to have a real voter, whether they are deceased or. One of the things they looked at was voters who had never voted. And if you look at voter history and you pop up with a whole bunch of voters in 2020 that had never voted previously, that was part of the bank. From what you're talking about, I think the voter turnout was greater than they expected as far as the results that they wanted. And they had to be able to figure out, how do we create more voters or rely on the flipping? So I don't know. I wasn't part of the planning.
I understand.
You know, and one of the hard things about intelligence is you're trying to find something and answer questions that the adversary doesn't want you to know, or they want to put you off to think you know what you know, and it's not what's really happened.
And just another question about the packet captures and like the e-recording, electronic recording of kind of identifying, which IP address is in time and space have communicated with another IP address. Is that what a deep dive, like audit, would be able to kind of pick up and analyze? Whatever team of experts would go and do that and try to find a before and after comparison, kind of what the symposium was somewhat bringing up on their screen?
I would say the best analogy is a security video camera. You're recording real time what happened. You're in a bank, somebody comes in, robs the bank, you've got the video recording. Multiple entities evidently pushed record before, during, and after and captured that information. That information is, unless someone manipulates it, is just a snapshot in time of what happened. You can't go back now and say, well, let's record what happened on those days. You have to do it in real time, just like if you turned off your video recorder at the bank when the job happened, you would have no evidence or recording.
And just to follow up, so you say a lot of these hackers, they don't want you to know that they've even been there.
Right.
So can they, with this technology, can they go and make the change so that you think you're seeing this before and after video, but it was changed and there's no trail, there's no dust, that anything you could see, or how would you be able to see when their intent is there to try to make sure it's hidden?
It all depends on the capability of the cyber forensic analyst, whether or not they could go in and figure that out.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Adams? Would you like to call on Representative Behringer for me? Representative Behringer, Representative Adams would like you to speak. Please proceed.
I have everything off. I don't have one electronic on. I'll tell you right now. All right.
Maybe you should just pull that one over there and keep it over there.
Yeah, good idea. All right. Before, thank you for coming to testify. However, before you step away, there's a couple of things I need to make sure that you do know. It was said before that there had been some issues in the city of St. Louis. I represent the city of St. Louis about some voting that had happened. It was based on ballot. It was based on paper. That's where that issue was, and it was taken care of. So I just wanted you to clarify.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that issue, so.
Okay, right. So the other thing is that you're talking about an error, a pretty large margin of error in the way of you're saying of these flipping of votes and changing of votes. And you can't specifically say where. And the reason I bring that up is because you're looking at a crazy data wonk that I have personally audited every city of St. Louis election. Mm-hmm. I can tell you where every new voter has come into my district. I can tell you what voter doesn't live in my district anymore. I can tell you who voted, who did not. And the reason is because that's how in tune I am. So I know the city of St. Louis, and that's why I want to mention this. I want to make sure that people who live in the city of St. Louis know that we have a great Board of Elections that's done a phenomenal job. And if there were anything that should be suspicious, I would have found it. However, based on what you have said, what makes no sense to me is that you keep saying it's China. China wanted to get into the election. If that were the case, then China would have wanted to flip Missouri and Biden would have won Missouri.
They didn't need Biden to win Missouri to win the election.
But what I'm trying to tell you is they would have no reason to play with our election because it was already going to go the way they wanted. They never would have come in Missouri to mess with our election.
I understand your point.
And so if you have other concerns about other states, I understand that. But the state of Missouri, as far as I'm concerned, did a phenomenal job. And I want to make sure that all the citizens of the state of Missouri know that because they did do a good job. And that's why I want to make sure before we ended this that our citizens know in the state of Missouri, our elections were very well run. That's all I have. Thank you.
I agree. And the data that they showed was that votes were flipped in every state, no matter who won the state.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Chairman.
Do we have anyone else? We'll let you go since the vice chair said you were testifying next.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
She's a visionary.
Exactly. And I spoke too soon earlier, Mr. Chairman. I said I didn't plan to testify, and then some things came forward. And my name is Shane Scholler. I serve as county clerk in Greene County, Missouri. Also have fellow election authorities who are here with us today, and I just want to recognize them for taking their time to come down this morning, and just want to thank the committee for this hearing. First and foremost, I don't have a ballot with me, but Missouri is a paper ballot state. We certify elections off of paper. We use electronic equipment on election night in order to be able to put uncertified results out to the public. I think it's important that everyone understands that. And just to back up a little bit, I was sworn in the county clerk in 2015, and you all may recall the election of 2016, and that was when we began to hear reports about Russia and other countries trying to hack into our elections at that time. And I began to take notice then. When I ran for county clerk, I made it very clear, because at that time there was kind of a push for online voting. I said I can never support online voting. It's not a secure method. We cannot support that. I even went to an election conference where that idea was pushed, and I was one of the few people out there at the time that said this is not a safe and secure way to be able to vote. One election day in Durham County, North Carolina, is anyone familiar with what happened in Durham County, North Carolina on the day of the election in 2016? Voters came in to vote, and as they went in to get checked in, the registration equipment, meaning we use poll pad, but a lot of different election authorities use electronic check-in equipment to check in the voters versus paper. There were issues with the information on the poll pad or the information they were using. Why do I mention that? If you go back and look at what was occurring prior to the 2016 election, it was not the election equipment that the issues were surrounding. It was actually voter registration data. And I actually testified before the U.S. Senate Rules Committee, and I was with a gentleman from Cook County there. He is an election authority there at the time. And they had found one little pinhole into the voter registration data in the state of Illinois. They literally could have changed every registered voter's number by one, which would have created great chaos and great confusion. And so I bring that up to say that if you look at what I think, if there's any issue that we have, it would be in the voter registration data. And I can tell you our Secretary of State works tirelessly to protect that data. He works with local election authorities. That has been one of our primary focuses. And I bring that up to say, not that they won't hack into the election equipment. Matter of fact, I welcome the scrutiny. Our fellow election authorities welcome scrutiny, because we understand that we are not certifying off of electronic tally. We are certifying off of a paper ballot. All the election equipment that we use is certified by the Secretary of State as directed by statute. And so before we ever get the opportunity to be able to go out to purchase, it is certified by the Secretary of State's office. We currently have 4 vendors in our state. You have Dominion, you have Unison, you have ES&S, and you have Hart InterCivic that any election authority can use to be able to tally the results on election night. Again, those results are uncertified. I also want to make sure everyone understands, for example, the equipment we use. Yes, we have a memory stick that we use. It's an encrypted stick. It's tested prior to the election by bipartisan teams. It is certified by those bipartisan teams that it's working correctly. It is then underneath lock and seal when it is sent to the local polling location for the day of the election. It is not opened up until the end of the night. If that memory stick is pulled out before the election, the equipment is shut down properly, all of the results are erased. Because it's encrypted, you can't use any other type of memory stick in it to be able to alter the data that of the paper ballots that have been put in that equipment. Why do I mention that? Because, again, that's the uncertified results. And the accumulator that we use the night of the election, as mentioned before, it is not in any way connected to the internet. Matter of fact, after the election, we go through the post-testing and auditing process. And the reason I mention that is because bipartisan teams come back together again. The election equipment is tested. All the memory sticks are tested. And then we actually do a random manual recount where no less than 5% of all the precincts are counted after the election to ensure that the election equipment was tabulating correctly on the day of the election. Those are important things to mention because that, again, is the assurance that we have as we go forward to the verification team to be able to certify the election results. The other thing that's important is the chain of custody procedures. Each election authority has very rigorous chain of custody procedures where once we receive the ballots, that is noted. Once they're put into the election equipment or how they're sent to the polls, that's noted. Once the election judges pull it out, the ballots on the day of the election, that is noted. As they're returned on the night of the election by bipartisan teams, that is noted. And then as they're put into the boxes to be sealed, that is noted. Everything has a chain of custody. Even the people that deliver the ballots are part of the chain of custody process. So I want to make sure people understand that so that we have no unaccounted ballots on the night of the election. It's also important to mention, if there's any concern that there were irregularities in the election, state statute, again, this is basically what we live by as election authorities right here. Our good Secretary of State has issued this book to us. Again, a lot of the laws that are in here have been passed by this body, so it's important to understand that. 30 days after certification, any candidate in Statute 115.557 can go before a circuit judge and say, I have enough information here to show that there was enough irregularities in the election that the results were not accurate. Again, that is to ensure that the integrity of the election occurred so that if anything did happen, the people have a right to be able to say, we want to have this issue addressed by the court, and then the court will issue out how the recount takes place if they decide that a recount needs to occur. So we have these safeguards in place. And again, you hear the term forensic audit. What I would recommend, and I'm not against a forensic audit, it's a term that we haven't heard in the election world before, but any type of audit we welcome. But there's an audit that we have been, as an association, the Missouri Association of County Clerks and Election Authorities, have begun to discuss with the legislature, and that's the term risk-limiting audit. It's a procedure that's used in other states, but basically the risk-limiting audit allows local election authorities to audit a sample of paper ballots using a statistically sound algorithm that randomly selects the ballots to be counted. Now, the reason I mention that is right now we do no less than 5% of the total precincts on election night. It's not the election as a whole. If we use a risk-limiting audit, we are then able to go in and take an entire race in and of itself and be able to do a recount for that race. And this is something that would give us greater assurity for our election results before they're certified. That's something that I know the Secretary of State is beginning to examine. They're taking a look at it. They're in conversation with us. But those are the type of things, rigorous post-testing, rigorous auditing of the paper ballot. And that way, when we go before the public, because as I mentioned, you could have a wide margin, but let's say that somehow they did get in the software coding and hacked that coding in some way, you could potentially have a flip result and not realize it and have a outcome that truly does not represent how the voters voted. A risk-limiting audit will catch that. We piloted one in 2019 for a local election that we did, November of 2019, and we wanted to see how it would work, and it was a tremendous opportunity to be able to go in, and again, bipartisan teams came together. We did it there, and we invited the public, everyone to be a part of it. And so that's one measure. The other thing I want to mention is after this past election, November 2020, I won't mention the state rep name or the district, but we did have a race that came in less than 0.5% of the actual votes cast. So by the CSR, it says we can do a full recount of that particular race. We did that. I was in contact with both the candidates. I was in contact with both the county chairs. We had bipartisan teams. We conducted a full recount of the election results for that particular race in and of itself. The only changes that occurred after we had all the ballots accounted for was if the mark was too light for the machine to be able to pick it up, and the bipartisan team said, yes, this was a positive vote for candidate Y or candidate Z, or if a voter erred and they end up circling. Again, the machines cannot pick up when a voter makes a personal choice by that. Okay, it's the same thing when we used to take the test as kids when we'd fill in the holes. It's just there to read the bars, and if there's a circle hole, it says you selected this choice, that's what it tabulates. So again, I welcome it because it's kind of interesting. President Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. Now, you realize where that proverb came from? Russia. I think we all agree. We're going to trust, but we're going to verify. I think that is the motto of election authorities across the state, is that we are going to do everything we can to make sure that when we go before the verification board, we have everything that we can present to them. If they have any questions, we're there to answer them and to be able to give an account for what happened, because verification board does not have to certify the election. They can actually say, you know what? I've got an issue here, and I want it to be resolved before I certify this election. So there are a number of opportunities throughout the entire certification process for anything that does not appear correct to be resolved. And so I just want to make that mention. Also, when it comes to the gentleman previously testified, we election authorities either order the ballot total off of the active voters, which that means we know we have a verified address for that voter, or they can also do the inactive voters, which would combine voters that have a verified address and those who have moved, but we no longer have a record of where they live. So you can order your ballot total off of that. Now, I can tell you that during November elections, you order more than enough ballots because you don't want people to get there and not have a ballot. Let me see if there's anything else that I left out. Modems. Very important to mention. I'm not aware of any election authority in our state that has equipment that has modem. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. For example, when we went out to purchase in late 2017, early 2018, we specifically put in our bid that our election equipment would in no way be connected to the internet, have no modem, so that could happen. And I think that's become a standard with election authorities when they go to purchase that equipment. So it's important to say that we understand that importance. And again, we're not certifying off of that equipment, we're certifying off the paper ballot. But with that, I forgot anything? Make sure my fellow LEAs be like, hey, okay.
Thank you.
I'm ready for questions.
I think what you've shown here is that we have a very good process in place for the fraud we know it could occur.
Yeah, and we can improve it with the risk-limiting audit.
And I think that is the purpose of this meeting, to explore issues that have maybe taken place somewhere else, maybe some of it here, but to make sure that we have that trust and we have that verified. So,
and could I add one thing, Mr. Chairman? I forgot.
I think you're going to. Go ahead.
Okay, you're kind. Election judges. The party chairs of each party on the 10th of December ought to present in the odd number year twice the number of names you need to be able to run a November general election. Mm-hmm. We rarely get names from our local county chairs. I'm not saying that as, we're upset about it, but I'm just saying the process that's in place, we're not getting names from local county chairs. If they do submit names, I'm not aware of any that are submitting twice the number of names. Now, I mention that because we need true bipartisan teams in every polling location. Additionally, challengers and watchers, for all those people who may be watching, those people, I love to watch football, but, I can be on the couch and say that the quarterback should have done that. It's a lot different when you're there and you're actually in the game, correct? Challengers are allowed by statute to be able to be there. If they think there's an election law being violated, they can challenge the election judges. They're appointed by their county chairs. Watchers are there. They can be there for the absentee counting. They can be there at the polling location. They can be there on election night. They can watch every process of every ballot that is tallied to ensure that it's fair. The reason I mention that is that for all those people who are concerned, our state empowers the people to be there and hold us accountable. And I welcome that. I have no issue. Now, sometimes they're misinformed and we have to work through an issue, but we are much better when the people are engaged. And so I would tell every person that cares about elections, get a hold of your county chairman of the party that you prefer, that you choose, and say, I want to be there and I want to be a part. And we will work with them.
And we've made that even easier we made it easier in House Bill 738, but we know the fate of that bill. But I'm sure it will rise again like the phoenix from the ashes, and we'll see what happens. Thank you very much, sir. We do still have another issue to go over today, so let's try to keep our comments concise. Let's don't repeat what we've done. Representative McGaugh, since you've called this witness up here, please proceed.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your absolute expertise on this area, for clarifying my mistake on the modem. I apologize to all for that. My memory is getting, smaller and smaller of my decades of service, and I did have Dominion machines, so they worked well for.
And I think it's more to say any election equipment that's electronic can be hacked into. That's why we don't certify off of that. I always tell people, that can be compromised. We understand that. That's why we have all these processes in place after the election before to verify.
And speaking of processes, can you recall how long ago that 1/2 of 1% changed, and also when we went to the CSR that changed about circling and the light, because had not that issue happened, you would have never opened those ballots. You would have never seen those counts, those ballots that the machine did not count. Is that right?
Correct.
And that can certainly change an outcome.
And I believe that started.
Your predecessor was there.
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
And he worked hard on that. And it was hard to get the committee to agree on, well, what if the line was too light? What if the pin had set down? So anyway, I just appreciate everything that you guys bring to the table. I loved being the person that can speak for you, and please come back, and please go back and tell everybody that we need your input.
As I say, I believe Secretary Blunt, followed by Secretary Carnahan, both worked on the CSR that we now use. And I remember Secretary Blunt at the time I worked with him actually in the office. He said, we are not going to adopt anything prematurely because we need to see what happens in terms of the implementation as we saw other states. And so Missouri, we took our time, and I think we were benefited by that wisdom that Secretary Blunt had at the time.
Yes. Does everybody on the committee know what the CSR is, just in case? Code of State Regulations. So besides that book that he showed you, that's the statute, the election law, you've got the CSRs on the side. So, yes, thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Chair.
Representative Wyndham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you for being here.
Yes.
I was going to call you representative for a second. I'll call you clerk. So so first of all, I don't think we agree very much on policy, but I agree with everything you said on procedure. I mean, it sounds very secure to me already. Even the vulnerability that you mentioned, it was in Chicago, right?
And could I interject? That's one of the most interesting things I found with McCain Election Authority is I've went to meetings where people I completely disagree with. We agree when it comes to the process that we talk about. As county clerks, half the time I don't know what the party is of the individual because we're interested in ensuring that the elections, as you say, fair, transparent, and trustworthy. That's our goal as well as election authorities.
Yeah, and it sounds like that trust but verify. It sounds like that verify has been happening for quite some time.
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's talk about the policy and like the end of what you said just a little bit. So you talked about poll watchers and challenges and such. So I want to read an old newspaper article for you and see what you think about it. So it says, and this is from a St. Louis Democrat in the 1920s. It says, we are informed that the decent element of white folks of both parties are being urged to come en masse at the opening of the polls throughout the county, do their voting early, and remain the balance of the day to frustrate any efforts that may be caused voters to be cast by the recently imported black people. Do you see how that connects there?
Yeah, and as a voter,
the last word was black people, by the way.
Yes, and I appreciate you mentioning that because I wasn't aware of that article. You said from 1920.
Right, that's from the 1922 Democrat Argus in Carruthersville.
I don't know when the statute came into place. We could check it, but No one can loiter at a polling location. You come in, you vote, you leave. The only people that can be there are the election judges and the challenger and our watcher that are appointed. Matter of fact, one of the things had recommended that in the bill last year or earlier this year that each candidate be able to appoint their own challenger and watcher and pay for them. I think most election authorities, for the very point you have mentioned, is you have too many, it could be viewed as intimidation, and we do not in any way want that to be what occurs there within the polling location, because that's the sole purpose, is so that people can go and freely cast their ballot without anyone trying to coerce them as they do.
Do you understand how seeding mistrust in elections could make folks, not only just in number, but make folks have intimidating personas when they go out and be poll challengers or watchers?
And as an election authority, if someone does in any way begin to intimidate as a watcher or challenger, we can actually ask them to leave, call the county chair and say, if you want someone else to replace them, you can, but they do not have a right to be there. If they in any way begin to inhibit what's taking place there at the polling location, they will be asked to leave, and we will call law enforcement if necessary, and have done so before across the state.
Okay. Well, it seems like you answered a lot of the what-if questions, and it's
Yes.
like questions that are just floating out there in the ether, so I appreciate that. And I don't want to, I don't know your schedule at all, but if any member of this committee, or even really any representative for that matter, or senator wanted to come see how you all ran elections, would you be open to that?
Actually, I'm glad. That was my last point you brought up. I want to invite anyone who wants to come observe, especially during an off year, an election. I invite you to do that. You can come at any point in the process and observe what takes place during the 10-week period leading up to the election, and then the 2-week period afterwards, and be able to watch on election day, election night. I think it would be an education that everyone would appreciate and probably learn from, in terms of, I had the opportunity to be able to go to Kansas before we purchased our election equipment. I was born in Kansas, Salina, grew up in Abilene before we moved to Missouri. What I was surprised about was in Kansas, at least at the time, they may have changed this, one person brought the election results back on election night. And I was like, wow, I'm glad here in our state we have a bipartisan team that gets in that car and does it together. So it's one of those things that makes you proud to be in Missouri, and when you even see a little thing like that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Did you want him?
Representative Simmons, please be more prompt in your asking of permission to interrogate.
Thank you, Mr.
Please
Chairman.
proceed.
Just two quick questions.
Yes.
Can a ballot ever be entered twice in a tabulator purposely by mistake and be counted?
I mean, human error could always be involved. For example, if it's theoretically possible, but it's certainly, that's why you would want a watcher there, for example. Watchers can ensure that if someone was trying to enter that ballot in more than once, that it would not occur. That's why the people are empowered to be able to check that. I mean, again, theoretically, anything is possible. I'm not aware of that happening, but never say never.
That's just, something in the November election, there was, again, conjecture of some videotapes and people thinking it was a set of ballots or a bag of ballots. Was it put in twice? And I don't know, what was audited or what came out of that, but that was.
Because the moment you would try to make a ballot specific to a voter, then you begin to violate the privacy of that voter. So that's why you couldn't.
Is there a check system, though, if it was put in, 5 times, and then your count at the end doesn't match with what comes in the poll pad as far as who registered?
Because we have if, for example, the chain of custody in terms of the ballots that are delivered at that polling location, if you had more ballots than the voters checked in, that's where, and we always tell our election judges that they need to, before they return, if you're off 1 or 2, we say that's fine, because we've had voters leave with the ballot. I saw the chairman look. Voters will leave with their ballot. We don't know why. It's an interesting phenomenon, but it does happen. But again, if there's greater concern later on that after the election in terms of a result, they can go and examine further. But there are occasions where those types of anomalies happen. It doesn't happen a lot, but it can.
And the other question is the software support updates that these companies, provide, your particular offices, for enhancements and whatnot. Is that something that each individual county decides when they need that update? Is that something where all the 40 Dominion systems in the state, they all go into the 40 systems around the different counties and give support? What is that schedule like? What happens in that process? What are you able to observe or not observe during that process?
And there's a process through the Election Assistance Commission where before, for example, when we purchased our equipment through ES&S, they were looking at updates, but they were going through the Election Assistance Commission before those updates were issued to the election equipment. So there is a process at the federal level where they work with these companies in terms of those updates before they are implemented at the local level. And so,
is there a time restriction on when those updates can be implemented as far as how many days prior to an election or how many days after an election is closed?
Well, the moment you begin to code your ballots and software, I mean, essentially, if it doesn't happen before that 10-week process, I would find any election official, I think they would be very hesitant. I know I would say no, say we're going to work with what we have, because again, we're not certifying off of that tabulator, we're certifying off of the paper ballot.
Do you, or I don't know if there's a statute requirement to make it public known when that update was produced or when it was scheduled for, just so the public is aware that it was done 3 months before the election and not done 3 days before an election?
The only thing I would say is once you make notice of it, you bring attention to it. So we certainly would record that and have that information, but I think you might want to be careful before you bring notice of something. I think we've seen at the national level recently that date certains or bringing notice to things can sometimes bring greater problems than you want.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Scholler, before I go to Representative Behringer, you saw my look when you so I can put my, and we'll go back to, some of you will remember, we put the ballot in the machine to be counted.
Correct.
It goes in, right?
It goes into the box, yes.
So how could I put that in and then take it home with me?
No. A voter will get the ballot issued, and they'll never put it in the machine. They'll walk out with it.
Okay, because that's why I was saying if it goes in the machine like what we said, and we did a lot of that last year, if you remember, during session on the paper ballot going in.
For example, when you...
but once it goes in the bucket, it's in the bucket.
If we've issued a voter an absentee ballot, they didn't vote, they come in, we take that, spoil it, and issue them a ballot there that has been issued at that polling location, because that's an example where you can get your numbers off. But again, you can...
We're good.
You always have to count. Okay,
absolutely. I was saying it went in the machine, and how would you take it back? So, very good. Representative Behringer has assured me she has one question.
I do. First of all, thank you. It's
You're
been so
welcome.
informational, and I'm all about the process. So I did hear you talk about registered voters is something we need to work on. So in your opinion, what I have said before, and I'll say again, the Secretary of State's office, when you register to vote at the age of 18, you should be assigned a number, and that number stays with you for the rest of your life in the state of Missouri, no matter when you vote. And the reason I bring that up is because let's say you registered to vote in St. Louis, and then you go away to school for 6 years in Colorado, voted for 6 years in Colorado, and come back to the state of Missouri. We only go by names right now. And so would you agree that if we had a number, not your Social Security number, like your Social Security number, where it's yours and yours alone in the state of Missouri to vote, then when you walked back into the state to vote again, to register to vote, that number would keep you from being registered in different places because it say you're already registered to vote here, so pick a place.
Well, and essentially to address that issue at the federal level, you can be part of and Secretary of State can address this better than I can, but they have a system to be able to, because of the registered voters, if someone's voted in more than one state, they have a sharing program where they can validate that. And so it's based off, we do have voter ID numbers for the voters, as well as you have the information, last for social. That information, if someone is voted in more than one state, does happen, and the federal authorities go after those individuals when it does.
So I guess I didn't present it in a way that what I'm trying to get to is that we don't have clean voter rolls. And the reason we don't is because we don't talk to each other. So when my neighbor across the street, who just moved to St. Louis County, when they move to St. Louis County, they'll be sitting on that voter roll for so long. If you go, and they're going to go register to vote in St. Louis County, as soon as they register to vote in St. Louis County, St. Louis City should pull them off their rolls. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, we
efficiency and
communicate
making
back
sure.
and forth as counties regarding that. Absolutely no. But when that happens, we pull up their name. We knew that they were registered in another county. Then the counties communicate and say, this voter is coming to this county, and then it's rolled off of the other county.
If you communicate it.
Well, we do.
Okay.
That happens. There's absolute communication that occurs in that. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Now, thank you very much for your testimony today, sir. How many more are going to testify on? How many more are going to testify on this issue? So we just got 2 more after this. Fantastic. We're crushing it now. Lady, please proceed when ready.
Thank you very much, Chairman Schall and Vice Chairman McGaugh and honorable members of the committee. My name is Madeline, and I am a policy fellow at the Foundation for Government Accountability, or FGA. FGA is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We're based in Florida, but we have staff located all across the country. I hail from Portland, Maine, and we work in more than 32 states across the country on program integrity issues, including election integrity, which is why I'm here before your committee today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today about a few specific areas of both election and initiative operations that are critical to maintaining process integrity. Thank you for sticking with us on the time limit. I appreciate the opportunity to testify. I'd like to start by highlighting some specific areas of election reforms for you to consider as you craft improvement for Missouri's future elections, as well as offer a perspective on how other states are tackling election issues. Missouri voters are certainly interested in making sure it's easy to vote and hard to cheat. I've been in many states to discuss this issue, and I commend Missouri and, of course, your committee for tackling problems in the election process as they arise. It's not how all states operate, and in this political climate, for you to put aside the rhetoric of the moment and to dig into the details of this topic is commendable. I want to be respectful of the time today. There's obviously a lot of ground to cover on the topic, so I'd like to touch on 2 primary categories with respect to election integrity: securing voting by mail and transparency in elections. So starting with securing voting by mail, I would urge you to consider prohibiting third parties from mailing pre-filled absentee applications to potential voters. As we all know, voting by mail became a much more common practice this year, and it's a good time to evaluate these processes to make sure that they're sound. There are some clear best practices other states already employ that I'm urging you to consider. A practice has emerged in recent election cycles where third-party organizations pre-fill absentee ballot applications, and these organizations then mail the pre-filled application to voters. Obviously, this opens the door to ballot harvesting and, of course, voter confusion. Just imagine you already voted, but then a new application for a ballot that you did not request shows up in your mailbox, and it's filled out with your information, which may or may not be accurate. This has happened in states around the country, with one D.C.-based political group sending out more than 5 million ballot applications in the 2020 election alone. One Pennsylvania election director said that the deluge has gotten so extreme that some people have accidentally thrown away their actual ballot applications because they were so confused. So I urge you, Missouri lawmakers, to consider banning the practice of pre-filled applications to help counter potential confusion and ballot harvesting schemes. And I'd just like to give you some perspective from around the country in response to a ballot harvesting scandal which actually overturned an election in North Carolina. Legislators banned local jurisdictions from accepting absentee ballot applications that were partially or entirely filled out by someone other than the voter. Florida, Georgia, and Iowa all recently enacted similar legislation, and many other states have passed similar prohibitions in the past, including Kentucky, Mississippi, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. Moving on next to, I would urge you to consider requiring voters, absentee voters, to include government-issued ID or the last 4 digits of their Social Security number on their absentee ballot envelope. As you know, currently this is not required here in the state of Missouri, and requiring this information is an additional layer of security for absentee ballots. Arkansas, Georgia, Ohio, and Wisconsin all use this simple process to verify ballots. I'd like to next move on to transparency in elections, which is something I know this committee is very concerned about. I would urge you to prohibit local governments from accepting funding from private individuals and third parties. I know last session you considered a bill that would prohibit election jurisdictions from accepting money like this to run elections. It was an excellent bill that would have banned private actors from influencing who the winners and the losers are here in Missouri elections. The issue has come to light in a major way recently. As I know you are likely aware, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative donated $4 million to help fund election activities during the 2020 presidential cycle. Most of these funds, called Zuckerbucks, were provided through the Center for Tech and Civic Life, and the funds were supposedly used for personal protective equipment to help guard election officials against COVID-19, and instead the funds were largely used to get out the vote efforts. While we all know that getting out the vote is fine, having private funds targeted specifically through official channels to areas based on political makeup is not. And that's what happened in 2020. So preliminary analysis indicates that more than $7 million was awarded across the state of Missouri. Of counties that broke for Trump in 2020, less than half of them received Zuckerbucks. By comparison, 100% of the counties that voted for Clinton in 2016 and in Biden in 2020 received Zuckerbucks. Regardless of political affiliation, Missouri elections should be safeguarded from outside influence. Third-party involvement in the conduct of elections, of course, undermines the integrity of the process and erodes voter confidence. Bills have already been passed in 2020 and signed into law across the country, including Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Kansas, Texas, North Carolina, and Tennessee. Next, I'd like to briefly touch on ballot drop boxes. Should the legislature allow ballot drop boxes, I would urge you to consider a way to increase transparency by having drop boxes be secure and monitored. To meet this requirement, drop boxes can be required to be in government buildings, as many are already equipped with video recording systems. It's a low-cost reform that would add a high level of accountability to this process. Florida, Georgia, Iowa, and Kentucky have passed this legislation. So, in summary, ending the practice of third parties filling out and sending out applications, stopping private funding of election operations, and requiring oversight and transparency of drop boxes are just a few ways that states are adding more security and transparency, and I think they're ideas that I would urge you to consider. And if you don't mind, I know this is short on time, but I'd like to just briefly touch on two initiative reforms. Is that all right, Mr. Chairman? So, to shift to discuss on two ballot initiative reforms that the legislature considered last session, these reforms would have ensured initiatives gather more widespread support. Most citizens of Missouri agree that democracy should not be for sale. The initiative process here in Missouri, like in other states, is too easy to be hijacked by out-of-state special interest groups. When ballot initiatives can be bought by billionaires from places like California or anywhere else, it isn't about the will of the voter. It's about the wallet of the funder. While the democratic process of an initiative is important, too often it's simply about big money bypassing the legislative process altogether. And I urge you to consider again these common sense reforms that will protect the initiative process and preserve it for actual Missouri voters. So briefly to touch on those two reforms, first is requiring at least 60% supermajority or higher of the total number of votes in the last gubernatorial election to vote yes for a reform to advance. As you know, in making sweeping changes to a state policy, a bare majority from a ballot initiative is too low of a threshold. 60% or higher should be required for bypassing the legislative process, where voters have a direct voice through their elected officials and an opportunity to speak and weigh in on issues. This past session, Arkansas and South Dakota passed supermajority reforms that will be going to their voters. Previously, Florida has also enacted this reform. Secondly, for constitutional amendments, this was the legislation you considered last session, requiring initial voter interest certification from 10% of voters in the last gubernatorial election from each congressional district before permitting signature gathering to begin. And then for statutory changes, requiring at least 5% from the last gubernatorial election from each congressional district. So as you all know, initiatives can often be born out of state and midwifed by a tiny band of interest groups who focus on gathering signatures in certain urban areas. Only once the initiative is on the ballot does the majority of the citizens actually hear about it. This reform would require sponsors to gather support across the state before the more formal signature gathering process can begin. This would ensure that there is real desire by voters across the state to see the question put forward to the people instead of relying on an interest from voters from a small geographical region. Both of these reforms will ensure that voters more broadly support initiatives before critical policy changes are implemented here in the state of Missouri. I appreciate the chance to walk through these election and initiative reforms today. And again, thank you for taking the time to explore this critical area of ballot integrity. I commend the committee for tackling it. As we all know, here's the bottom line. Voters here are passionate about the fundamental right that we all have as Americans to vote and participate in the democratic process. They don't want loopholes or weaknesses in the design that threaten the right, and they certainly don't want billionaires from out of states to influence local elections or to confuse or exclude people. And they don't want a fraudulent vote to cancel out their vote. In short, as I mentioned at the beginning, they want it to be easy to vote and hard to cheat. These common sense policies that many other states have enacted are worth your consideration as you move forward in review of the elections and initiatives here in Missouri. Thank you very much for your time.
Any questions? Representative Adams, proceed.
To inquire, Mr. Chairman, what group do you represent again?
I'm with the Foundation for Government Accountability. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization based out of Florida.
So no idea who funds you. You said you're not for profit.
Correct. Our donors are private, privacy for citizens and transparency for government.
And so they are private, so we'll never know who they are.
They are private citizens. That's right.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Representative Wyndham, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. So, well presented. Do you mind saying where you're from? Are you from Missouri?
I am not from Missouri. I'm from Portland, Maine.
Okay, you're from Portland, Maine. My brain takes me down rabbit holes. I was going to ask if Portland, Oregon or Portland, Maine is bigger than Portland, Oregon, but I won't ask that. So
it is not, but it was first.
Oh, there you go. So, so the Foundation for Government Accountability is nonpartisan, nonprofit.
That's correct.
Its headquarters, I'm just on Google here, is in Naples, Florida.
That's right.
Naples is a pretty rich place, right? My college roommate was from Naples.
I don't know the area, but I'll take your word for it.
Okay. So you said a lot in your presentation. It was really good. The first thing that you said that caught my attention was Missouri voters. Do y'all have a Missouri associate?
Yes, we work with lobbyists here in Missouri.
Okay.
Yes.
So you said that Missouri voters want elections to be easy. They want it to be easy to vote and hard to cheat.
That's correct.
So do you understand how those two things can conflict?
Why don't you give me an example?
So you said you think that people should have to put their a copy of their ID on their absentee ballot.
That's right.
Do you understand that some people don't have printers or aren't able to put a copy of their of their ID on the absentee ballot? So that makes it harder to vote or harder to cheat in some people's mind, but also harder to vote.
Well, I think in that circumstance, right?
That's in a lot of circumstances. That goes for ballot drop boxes. Maybe your election authority is way further away. That goes for pretty much all. I won't say all, but a lot of election issues, specifically the ones that you're pointing out.
Right, and so when you go to the polls here in Missouri, you present at the moment non-photo identification, right, to vote?
Well, you can, yes.
And so this would be a corresponding requirement for absentee ballots.
If I'm not mistaken, the first time you vote absentee, you actually do have to put a copy of your
That's correct.
Your ID on.
Yes.
So you want it to happen every time.
That's right. Yes. So of a government-issued ID or the last four of your Social Security number. That's right.
Okay, or the last four of your Social Security number. So, Okay, I guess that's kind of an out on doing the. That might already be a thing too, if I'm not mistaken. But that's kind of an out on putting your ID there. But still, those things tend to conflict, making it harder to cheat because you can make it harder to cheat at a lot of things. But once you make it like impossible to cheat, it might also be impossible to vote.
Right. I would simply say that the barrier to adding a government ID or last four of your social security would increase security substantially for the absentee ballot process.
Okay, and you mentioned that what did Georgia do that you liked? They just passed a law where you can't do something.
Was it? I'm sorry. Which reform are you speaking to?
I don't remember. I didn't write it down. I should have because you mentioned a lot that I wanted to address. But so you said that Georgia did something. I'm wondering if it was in the same bill that the Georgia legislature just passed that said you can't give people out just standing in line to vote. You can't give them any food or drink. Was that in the same bill?
So let me just.
I think it was.
Let me just back up for 1 second. So the Georgia piece of legislation that you're referring to actually didn't ban water. It banned water from third-party organizations, but not from the government.
Okay.
In line. That's correct.
Not from the government.
That's right.
Does the government ever go out and give people water while they're standing in line?
They are allowed to provide water.
They do it.
They are allowed to provide water. Yes.
Do they do it? I'm not asking if they're allowed to do something. I'm allowed to go rock climbing, but I don't like rock climbing.
Well, the bill just passed, and there hasn't been an election, so I don't know what they will do going forward. But
Okay.
when you said that
In the
they were
past.
banning water and food, it wasn't a complete ban. I'm just saying it was from third-party organizations. in
So
line.
the election authority will have to spend this money to go out and give people food and water and drinks, not only with the actual buying of supplies, but the manpower and sending election authorities or judges or whatever. Or I don't know, maybe having them just take.
Can we keep the comments confined to what we're talking about here, please?
Well, that was in the speech, so it is what we're talking about here. She said when we talk
Keep
about
it confined to
election
this, please.
Okay, so that I'll read the Georgia real quick. No person shall solicit votes in any manner or by any means or method or participate in the giving of any money or gifts, including but not limited to food and drink to an elector. So I'll move on from that. So what that you propose to us makes it easier to vote?
Well, I'll say one thing. One of the big things is transparency, right? And so what happened in this last election cycle with Zuckerbucks is voters are not going to know who's paying for running their elections.
How does that make it easier to vote?
Well, it's certainly a big part of what it is for voters knowing who is funding elections.
Okay, maybe I'm just not. I don't see how that makes it easier to vote.
Well, then let me give you another example.
Okay.
So one of the reforms that I suggested that has been passed across this country is prohibiting third parties from mailing pre-filled absentee applications to potential voters. And what I've heard from talking to representatives and to voters across this country is that it's exceptionally confusing when they receive a pre-filled ballot application and it looks pretty official, but it's from a third party and it contains errors. So to your point, I think it will make it much clearer for Missouri voters when they do not receive a pre-filled ballot application from a third party.
Okay, so do you think that, so just kind of on the flip side of that, if a person asks me to send them an absentee ballot with their stuff already on it, I wouldn't be able to do it, so it wouldn't make it easier to vote. It would put more stipulations on that. And since you mentioned Zuckerbucks, you said something like it was supposed to go to PPE, but it ended up going to something else. And what's the proof of the something else that it was expended on?
Well, if you want to see the sources of that, there are two ways you can do it. One is through the Center for Tech and Civic Life. They have a lot of that information on their website, and also public records requests, which is where I'm getting that information
Would you
from.
be willing to provide that information to the committee that
I
it
sure
was
would.
not
Yep.
PPE that was used for that?
Yeah, they had applications, so yes, I'm happy to provide that to the committee.
Okay, specifically how it wasn't used for PPE, how it was used for something else, because
Yes.
you said it was used
Yes,
for something. Okay,
right.
so, and then in addition to this I'll end with this because it isn't directly related, but you said you don't want private influencers giving money, so no Zuckerbucks to election authorities.
In the administration of elections, that's
Okay.
correct.
So this might be out of your portfolio, but does your organization have a stance on charter schools and how they give money to the education system?
I don't believe that's before the committee today, but so I don't have a position on it.
Oh, I was just saying in your organization, FGA, do they have a position on
I can't speak to that.
it? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Wyndham. Anything further for this witness? Thank you for coming all the way from Portland, Maine.
Thank you very much for having me.
And
for
they
your time
were,
today.
you were the first Portland, right?
Right, we were.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. The lobster would have been warm by the time we got to her, so. All right, our second to last one on our first topic for the day. I believe you're having something passed out. You are more than welcome to start when ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. While that's being passed out, I just want to say my name is Keith Carmichael. I'm not an expert in, well, almost everything or anything, but I will take credit for bringing Colonel Stevens here today. I think he's added a large part to the discussion. I'm not going to reiterate things that he has talked about to any great degree. I want to start by just calling out the very first thing we did. We took a moment of silence today, and we did that a bit like a family. It was a bit like a family, and we are a family of Americans. We don't all agree all the time on the same thing, but you ever see a family that did? I don't know. You guys have family politics, just church politics. There's all kinds of politics. I've learned a lot today. As a citizen who doesn't know a lot about elections, I've come to the conclusion that this committee is bound and determined to improve. I've come to the conclusion that Missouri is on the right track. They have some tremendous leaders. They have a tremendous track record. And they're a little bit proud of that. And I like that too. Just a moment ago, a veteran military analyst told you that you were attacked. I don't know if you were listening. Nobody ran out. I don't know if it was on TV. I didn't see anybody call home. I know in 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, I imagine people just stopped what they were doing. But we are so used to this type of thing. Where were you on September 11th? You know, more people actually died on that day than died at Pearl Harbor, specifically in that one location. What you were doing exactly when that came to your attention. I guarantee you know where you were, who you were talking to. I wonder if you'll remember today what you were doing and what was on your mind when you found out that this had happened. It seemed to me like we went on kind of like as if nothing had happened. I mean, just first of all, show me. We're from Missouri, and that's, if I have a purpose here today, it's to say stop and think about what a 26-year veteran of military intelligence told you this morning. And you should at least say, I'm going to find out for sure. The reason I called him is because I saw information presented and I said, I want to find out for sure. We're a family. And if we were attacked, if you were attacked, I was attacked. And if you, well, you know what I mean. We were attacked. What got my attention, perhaps most of all, and you'll find it as you look at this information, if you'll thumb through it, these are counties in Ohio. I think it's safe to say that Dr. Douglas Frank really wasn't looking for notoriety in this fashion. He is a well-known physicist. I have a close friend who knows him as a personal friend, has known him for 5 years. He's just a geek. He's not an attention seeker, but he is a numbers cruncher. And in September of 2020, he was teaching his students how to analyze census data. Kind of a little coincidence. He was called by a friend in Pennsylvania to look at her race. She just didn't feel comfortable that this was correct. And of course he said, you know, there's some problems here. It's going to take me a while. I really don't know what's going on, but I'm sure glad this didn't happen in my home state of Ohio. So he went home and began to do, and you'll hear him tell if he testifies, or you can go and listen to him tell the story briefly, that he came home and started analyzing data, and he analyzed 14 counties in Ohio. Now, Mr. Chairman, I don't know how much money you have in your pocket, but if I was going to say you could lay your wallet up there on the desk and I'll look at it, and if I tell you exactly how many dollars you have in your wallet, it's not going to bother any of these good folks, but you're going to wonder what is with this.
You have talked to my wife this morning.
Yeah, that's it.
What she put in it.
Got to be a reason.
Because I'm only allowed to do so much.
Exactly. And most of us don't carry money in our wallet anyway. We got a couple of cards and so on. But if I go to the person on your right and the person on your left and I do it again, you know, they're going to be bothered by it, but these other folks may not. If I go all around the room and I tell every one of you, and some of you are going to start looking in your wallet. You're going to pull, I don't even know how, they're going to pull out your wallet. Well, I do have $13, and somebody put a penny in here. I don't know what this is doing in here. You shake it out. $13 and 1 penny. I'm not talking magic. I'm talking about mathematics. It does not partisan. Math is not partisan. This man did 14 counties in Ohio, and then he predicted the other 74 counties. He predicted the total number of ballots cast. Now, I was going to pick on this representative, and she's not here because I know she's from Boone County. And I was going to say, if I go to Boone County and just give an information that's available in the public record, I tell you exactly how many votes were cast in that election, she's going to say, you can't do that. You shouldn't be able to do that. And I say, well, I shouldn't be able to tell the chairman how much money he has in his pocket, but if I just did, I think I have your attention. And if I tell all of you, you're going to all wonder what's with it. Somebody's going to say, stop. How are you doing this? He determined that an algorithm was being used along with registrations to determine the number of ballots that really could be used and not color outside the lines. And the one thing that the colonel didn't tell you is that he predicted these ballots, these total number of ballots cast, with a correlation coefficient of 1.000. Now, if you're I'm not a math major. I just told you I'm not an expert in anything. But I urge you to just simply look at the information, look at the data. And as a citizen in Missouri, I have to say, wait a minute, we got to stop. We don't know if our elections were affected in Missouri. There are some evidence that some counties were in some way affected, but maybe not. You know, we have an amazing system. Maybe there's nothing different in the final count. I want you to look at some of these counties, and I want you to see the way that the ballots and the registrations mirror each other. If you look carefully, you'll see there's a line underneath the red. It's his prediction. 1.00. You'll hear him say, this is not human. He should not be able to predict the number of ballots cast in one county, much less 74. He says, you know, you take that algorithm and you change it. It first of all, doesn't work in Pennsylvania, but if you change it just a little bit, it works in every county in Pennsylvania. And then he took the algorithm, went to Colorado, and 64 counties predicted with some of those counties were, 0.99. One of them was 0.997. He said, what went wrong? That's the one that the colonel was talking about, where some of those folks, They didn't vote because they're in prison. So all I am doing here today is, first of all, I'm going to learn as much as I can about what you folks are doing, and I salute you for the bills that you passed through this committee, and you know, I'm sure I wouldn't agree with all of them. I mean, we probably wouldn't all agree on, but we are trying to do something to make it better. And I'm really disappointed that more of them didn't make it to the governor's desk. But on the other hand, what is fast in Jefferson City, right? What happens fast? Hearings don't happen fast either. I'm going to make it short. If you have any questions for me, once again, I'm a citizen. My name is Keith Carmichael, and I'm here to thank you for your service, what you do. You represent your constituents very well, and I'm proud to be here today.
Thank you very much. Anything? I would like to thank the Colonel. I didn't recognize your veteran service. Thank you very much. Thank you. Seeing no, no, please, lady. Let's have a little levity at some point today. Please proceed.
Absolutely. I think everybody knows me, but just in case, my name is Trish Vincent. I'm the Deputy Secretary of State and Chief of Staff for Secretary Ashcroft. Sorry he could not be with you all today. He is traveling the state today, tomorrow, and the next day, and talking about elections and a number of other things. This is about election integrity. At the end, if it's okay, I'd just like to give one brief statement about initiative petitions and then answer any questions. So, I want to thank the legislature, especially this body. I do believe that there were a number of initiatives that were passed out of this committee. I think that we worked together with the Secretary of State's office with members of this committee to pass a really great bill. But I agree with Representative McGaugh. I think we need to look at that bill again. And after the November election, there were things that obviously that need to be tweaked and some things added. I want to echo also that we work with wonderful local election authorities and boards. The Secretary often jokes, I can't tell him what to do, but we have a lot of conversations, and there's a lot of questions back and forth. We do have a very secure system that all of our election authorities use. We put in layers of security to make it doubly secure. We work with the ABCs of the federal government. So elections is just not one thing, one day in August, November, February, or April. This is something that we work every day on. So I just wanted the members of this committee to know that we are looking at this on a daily basis. I want to point out some things that we believe that should lend to election integrity, and that it's a list of things that we believe would make our voters and our citizens believe in our elections, believe in transparency, believe that we are doing the right thing. Obviously, voter ID. We've been wrestling with that for a number of years, and one of your members had a great piece of legislation that was singularly voter ID. Good bill, and unfortunately didn't get passed over on the other side of the house or other side of the building. We would like to see stronger non-in-person ID for absentee voting. I think that Missouri, you all did a great job, but we also, when we look at nationally, we had a lot of states that passed bills at the nth hour. You all were wise not to do that, and Missouri had very good elections, a number of very good elections during a COVID year. But stronger non-in-person ID for absentee voting, I think, is something we would like to discuss with you all. Hand-marked paper ballots. We have paper trails on our ballots, but hand-marked paper ballots really is a must. Now, there are exceptions. Obviously, we understand that. We do have devices designed to assist voters with disability, but those should be used for those voters. And hand-marked paper ballots should be used by everyone else. The Secretary would like to see audit-enabling legislation that's actually tied to funding. There has to be some enforcement to audit. So yes, we have a CSR, but we can't enforce that, and there are no penalties if it doesn't occur. Another thing that we saw during the November election is curing of absentee ballots. We'd like to see legislation that does not allow for curing of absentee ballots. We had counties doing different things, some allowing, some not. Third parties coming in to help cure those ballots. So again, legislation that would not allow that to occur. Our local election authorities do a great job, but sometimes we do have to prod them a little bit to clean up their voter rolls. So if there could be some mechanism in which that's somewhat tied to funding, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, I know they have a lot on their plate, we all do, but cleaning up the voter rolls is extremely important, and that keeps our rolls the cleanest as possible. And I do believe we have clean voter rolls right now. Physical cybersecurity testing at the local level by the Secretary of State or an authorized party that the legislature would deem appropriate. Authorize the Secretary of State to require cybersecurity testing, including penetration testing of vendor machines, programs, and systems. Authorizing the Secretary of State to revoke or withhold a certification of vendors, and that's obviously subject to the purpose or the appropriation to do the cybersecurity testing. On that note, it was discussed about our vendors. Yes, we have, for election equipment, we do have 4 vendors. Those vendors go through an arduous process. It has to be approved by the EAC first. That is a very long process for those vendors. Then they have to come to the state of Missouri, and then we certify them at the Secretary of State's office. When they do an upgrade, like one of our, Mr. Scholler testified, that upgrade is just not, oh, we have an upgrade, we're going to do it. No, those have to go through certification as well. So it just doesn't happen in 6 months or 3 months. That's a long process to go through that certification. Even though we've heard testimony that the election equipment is not connected to the internet, to codify that in law would be a big step as well. Forbid any election equipment to be connected to the internet. It's pretty simple. We say simple in this building, but we all know that simple is not what you and I think it means. Tightening the voter information provided. We give out birth dates. In 738, we restricted that. I think it finally came out that we were going to restrict it just to the year because we may need to know when there's a Bill Smith Sr., a Bill Smith Jr., but protecting telephone numbers as well. In this era of identity theft, I think that we could look at what information that is provided from our voter rolls. Also, allowing the Secretary of State to notice a local election authority to audit their list of registered voters for accuracy. That's something we don't do now. Something that was included in 738 that was very, very good is allowing no election changes by law or rule 26 weeks before a presidential election. We saw an awful lot of that happening nationally, and that created chaos, I might add. And the other thing is do not allow any compensation for those who solicit voter registration applications. We see a lot of third parties paying people to go out and register to vote, and I can tell you it is so easy to register to vote. We get most of our registrations from the Department of Revenue that we work with, and then we have an online portal that most of the other registrations come that way. But there are other litany of ways to register to vote, but third parties, again, create a great confusion out there with these programs and sending emails and telling people to register to vote when in fact they were already registered to vote. I'm not going to go on and on about elections, and certainly I'm sure there's going to be questions after this, but I do want to touch on initiative petitions. And really, the big thing that Secretary Ashcroft would like to see is a higher majority on changing the Constitution. When we have a low turnout and 14% of the electorate changes what's in the Constitution, it's pretty sad. So if there were whatever majority you all decided as the legislature to raise that threshold, I think would be a benefit to all Missourians and to our Constitution, which is way thicker than it should be. So that's all I have to say today. If there are any questions, I'm happy to entertain them at the best of my ability.
Representative Adams.
You take your mask off for me. Thank you, Representative.
Sure, just for you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I like to hear from the Secretary of State's office about these issues in their position. You made a statement about curing votes, and that the Secretary of State is very much opposed to that. Why wouldn't the state establish a procedure for voters to cure their votes, being we say we want people to be able to vote and their votes to matter and to be counted. Why doesn't the state set up a procedure for the curing of the ballots, and that is uniform, so you don't have this problem of some locations doing one thing and some not doing it, and others don't know what they're doing?
Well, first of all, the Secretary believes the best way to vote is to go to the polling place on Election Day. You have a wide array of time in which to do that, and you can vote in person. You look at your ballot and you put it in the tabulator, and it's done. There are people that may need to vote absentee. I think the absentee application is very simple, and quite frankly, there's nothing in law today about curing. So what I'm asking the legislature to do, I could put a CSR together about it, but again, I can't enforce that. But you can pass a law that the local election authorities and boards would have to go by. I think voting absentee is fairly simple. But I do think that, again, I don't think we're putting obstacles. I think we're making people trust the election process and the way that they're voting. There's always subjectivity in areas when you're dealing with an absentee envelope. And so it's either signed or it's not signed. If the voter forgets to sign it, why is it okay for an election authority to call them and say, you didn't sign this, you want to come sign it? Do they get to get their ballot out of the tabulator and say, oh, I didn't mean to vote that way, can I change it again? So again, it is your prerogative to determine if you want to allow curing or not to allow curing. And a law would be better than a rule. So way that everybody could read the law the same way, and we would all work by whatever the law is that you passed.
Thank you very much. Representative Wyndham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Madam Deputy Secretary. So I think that you said something I liked and something I didn't like. So
imagine that.
Right? That means you're doing good. So you mentioned a penetration testing and vulnerability assessment.
I did.
That's something that you suggest?
Yes.
Okay. And do you think that the Department of Homeland Security has qualified and certified people to do that?
I could not answer that question.
Oh, boy.
I'm
worried about how much faith we have in our Department of Homeland Security here as a people. But okay, I'll just say then, I'll just express. I'll let you finish. Did you want to finish?
I
or
would.
Do you want me to go ahead and cut you off?
No,
okay.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
We have very talented IT folk that I work with every day. I trust them incredibly with our voting system. We work with other individuals that I would trust, but that was a broad statement when you said Department of Homeland Security. I don't know everybody that works at the Department of Homeland Security. But I think with your leadership and with what we would do, we would come up with the individuals that would have the education and the necessary skills to provide that service.
Yeah. I just got to say it. So I'm trying not to be the dead horse, but I mean, it's like I don't know everybody in the Army, but I trust the Army to defend us, right?
I agree, but we're talking about the Missouri election systems. So,
sure.
You know.
And my point is that St. Louis County has this, it participates in the Department of Homeland Security's penetration testing and vulnerability assessment. So I just wanted to pat St. Louis County on the back for doing something that the Secretary of State's office has already suggested. Even though we may or may not know, apparently, if there's qualified and certified people at the Department of Homeland Security. And then to talk about curing a little bit. So you said that you related it to, and I don't agree with this, but you related to curing a ballot to taking the ballot out of the machine after it's counted and saying, oh, I didn't mean to vote for a person like that. Is that right?
I did say that.
Okay. So in my mind, it's more of, have you ever seen an election authority, someone won't fill in their bubble all the way, or make another small mistake, and the election authority will say, hey, stop, you made a mistake. You want to do this before you put your ballot into the machine. Have you ever seen that?
No, because
you never seen
I
an
don't
election
go back
authority
to no,
correct a mistake with a person's name?
Why would an election authority be looking at anybody's ballot, how they voted? Yeah. And again, if you put it in the machine and let's say you overvoted, the tabulator will spit it back out and give you an opportunity. That's a second chance. Thank you, Representative McGaugh.
Yeah.
But I don't take my ballot to an election judge and say, did I fill it out correctly? I don't want them to see how I voted.
Okay.
Right?
Well, I won't say right to that. I think that people assist them with voting, and there's small errors, and like you said, the machine spits it out. Sometimes one time, I won't even say one time. Sometimes I don't vote in a specific race, and it'll say, "Hey, did you know you didn't put in a bubble? You didn't fill in a bubble for here," and I'll put it back in. I knew that.
Yeah, the
So
tabulators will allow you to undervote. They won't let you overvote. So it may not spit it out if you undervote. There's many times that I don't vote with every race either, but it doesn't spit it back out.
So St. Louis County did spit mine back out once because I didn't put in the bubble. So that's the same as curing a ballot because the ballot hasn't been counted yet when you're curing a ballot. You're curing the application. You don't cure the actual ballot. You cure someone's having a mistake on their application to the ballot.
Secretary Windham, we're going to disagree on this particular.
Oh, you gave me an upgrade there. You called me secretary.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Representative Windham. I'm used to saying secretary a lot. Representative Windham.
Usually tell him he's wrong a lot.
Yeah, we're not going to agree on this curing process. I know. So that's the way that we think it should be, and
okay.
You need to vote on whatever law is passed, and I don't.
Okay, and so rather than establishing a process for curing a ballot, you just think it should be thrown out, throw the baby out with the bathwater?
I think laws speak volumes, and again, a law would require the local election authorities to do something. I can suggest all I want, but I cannot require the local election authorities to do anything.
Okay.
Now, if something goes wrong, who's the first person blamed? Usually the Secretary of State. But again, I am not saying that our local election authorities are not the most wonderful person in the world. But we do have 116 local election authorities and boards. And if we have a law, then that provides them the framework in which they would conduct elections. And so that's what we're asking for.
Right. A law could actually be also setting up a procedure. So you can't cure a ballot after a certain amount of time. You can't cure a ballot at all. So I think the Secretary of State's office is pigeonholing itself and saying, well, it has to be a law, so we'll say that you can't do it at all. Well, it has to be a law, so you could say that you could set up the way that it should be done if you all know how it should be done better than the local election authorities, which were the ones curing the ballot. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to push my button so you could hear me. Representative Windham, last year, I do believe we took care of the curing issue because we made sure that once the ballot was cast, once it entered the ballot box, it was deemed cast, whether it be as you were absentee balloting or if you were in-person absentee. Remember, because that's when we went through the whole thing. Once it goes in the machine, it's deemed cast. That's what the legislation we attempted to pass sent out of the House. Yes, it was. Well, if you want to talk about curing of the application, it's completely different than what we were talking about in the legislation was curing of the ballot. So, anything else for the good lady from the Secretary of State's office? Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Is there anything else on voter integrity or cybersecurity? I would like to, one last thing, and as we sat here and talked about data hacking and whatever, it was a large retailer several years ago with a data breach, probably one of the largest in the country. They did everything right on their credit and debit platforms. They were PCI compliant, everything else. And somebody, they had a system within all their outlets that managed their HVAC system. And someone unknowingly put in a update to the HVAC system, and somehow that wormed its way into their debit and credit payments. So whatever we do, whether it be in our electrical grid, our financial services platforms, whatever, we have to be aware of other connection points. And I don't think I want to make it clear, I think that our clerks are doing a great job. We have to make sure we give them the tools to continue to do that. And that was my purpose today, to make sure that we talked about these odd things that could impact the integrity and the trustworthiness of our systems. So, now that we're done with voter integrity, is there anyone left to talk about initiative petitions? Please. And let me bring us up to date what we did on initiative petitions last year. We passed House Committee substitute for HJR 22, 9, and 27. It was about constitutional amendments, and we also passed House Bill 333, Initiative Petition Regulations, and that was Representative Simmons' bill. Those two both made it out of here and met a similar death to all other election reforms except for age requirements for some offices in the Senate. So with that, we'll open it up to testimony on initiative petitions. We have one. Please, if you fill out a witness form, please proceed.
And I did, and I will be very brief. I'm going to try to get back before carpool. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you very much for allowing me to testify today. My name is Jen Bernstein, and I am the Advocacy Manager for the National Council of Jewish Women St. Louis. We are a not-for-profit in metropolitan St. Louis, representing over 5,000 members, supporters, and volunteers around the state of Missouri. We work primarily on community service, advocacy, education, philanthropy, and other things to improve the quality of life for women, children, and families in Missouri while supporting individual and civil rights, and we have just entered our 127th year in St. Louis. The Missouri legislature is seeking to take away the will of the people and their constitutional rights by making it harder for the citizens of our state to initiate and pass new laws and constitutional amendments through the petition and ballot process. The Missouri Constitution currently permits an initiative to be placed on the ballot if 8% of legal voters in 2/3 of the congressional districts sign a petition to initiate the action. The revisions would require that 10% of legal voters registered to vote in Missouri sign the petitions in all congressional districts to bring an initiative to the people for approval, and it would also require a supermajority, 2/3 of the votes, to pass a ballot issue, as opposed to the simple majority required today. We feel these are blatant attempts to silence the voices of Missouri voters because many legislators were upset by certain initiatives that were introduced and passed by the vote of the people in last year's election and in the past, like the puppy mill issue and others, and we feel this is unacceptable. So, in summary, NCJW St. Louis strongly discourages you from attempting to reform the current initiative petition regulations. Thank you.
Questions? Representative Wyndham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just briefly say thank you for being here and braving our long hearing.
That was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Schwandern, you were looking at me earlier. Was that because you had a question? Thank you. It is great to have Sherry with us today.
Gotta have brevity.
Any other questions? Well, first off, how long to Carpool Lane? You got an hour drive back to Carpool?
About an hour and a half, but I will drive the speed limit, I promise.
At least in the school zone, right?
Oh, of course, always in the school.
What age? What grades?
12. He's 12 in 7th grade.
Very good.
Yeah.
Those are rough years. They were the toughest 2 years of my life, 7th grade. Yeah. Ha-ha. Anything else come for this witness? Thank you very much. Anyone else testify on initiative petition reform? Are you headed to Carpool too? Okay. Go ahead and fill out your witness form, put it up there, and
Right.
tell us what you got to tell us.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for providing this session. This was really interesting this morning and this afternoon. My name is Marilyn.
Maybe this evening.
My name is Marilyn McLeod. I'm the current president of the League of Women Voters of Missouri. And as you may be aware, the League of Women Voters came out of the women's suffrage movement. We fought very hard for women to get the vote, and we feel very strongly on that particular subject. We believe every citizen should have a voice in our government. We do not see any need for legislation to limit the petition process in Missouri or to increase the election security. We think this committee should look for ways to increase voter participation, not limit it. We often say that the real problem is that not enough people vote. We wish more people would vote. So that's kind of a main thing that we care about. Voting is a fundamental right of every citizen. We were very pleased that the state allowed voters who were concerned with COVID last year to use mail-in ballots in the 2020 elections. While this increased turnout, experts say election security was not an issue. Also, at this moment, although this is not about initiative petitions, the idea of expanding the absentee ballots to have a no-excuse absentee ballot would be a great boon to all the citizens of the state. The initiative process is a way citizens can use their voice to participate in our democracy. Recent examples of petitions signed by thousands of Missouri citizens and approved by a majority of voters include expanding Medicaid, raising the minimum wage, protecting worker rights, and relieving pain with medical marijuana. Our state constitution grants voters this power, and our members oppose attempts to make it more difficult to get an issue on the ballot. We encourage the state to use federal money to help county clerks and other election authorities update voting equipment, and obviously you care very much about, and we would all care about, election security, and also to make it easier for all eligible voters to cast their ballots securely. Thank you.
You talked about well, thank you for coming as well. You talked about no excuse being to help so people don't have to commit perjury when they say they're not going to be out of town or they have. Are you okay with a photo ID at that point as well? If we had no excuse, because last year part of the 738, House Bill 738 had some no excuse language in there, but also in exchange also required you to show an ID, photo ID, government issued photo ID when you did the absentee. Is that a reasonable trade-off, or should we just open it up so no excuse? What is your guys' opinion, I guess, on that?
Definitely no excuse absentee ballot, just because there are many situations that people have that make it impossible to vote on Election Day, and they don't fit those categories. Mm-hmm. So, some examples, for example, if someone is a student and has a job and doesn't have a car and can't get to their polling place in the time allowed, a simple question, lots of people might fit that. And, we did discover that people really liked the mail-in ballots last year. I think it was very helpful, and it regardless of political party, I think was really helpful. It was helpful for older citizens.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to go back to the mail-in like we did during COVID. I'm just being honest with you from sitting on this side of the microphone. I just don't see that as an option. My question is, if we're going to go to a no excuse on the absentee, is a requirement of a photo ID reasonable in your guys' mind? And if you're not ready to answer that, I understand. I'm just
whatever the system is now.
Okay, so you would prefer not to have a photo ID?
To expand it.
Okay. Representative, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank Marilyn for coming because she's my constituent. Also, Marilyn, I learned by being on this committee for 5 years that although Missouri has the initiative petition process, there are several or some, I know Dan Stacy would know the number, but he's not here, but some states do not even have an initiative petition process at all. Every law must go through the legislature. Is there anyone here on the committee that knows that number? There's most states, not a few, but a lot. Okay. Most states, I will take John's word for it, do not even have an initiative petition process. So I think the citizens of Missouri are fortunate that we at least have that option. So I learned something new when I was told that information, and I thought I'd pass that along. And thank you, Marilyn, for coming.
And thank the state of Missouri for having that option.
Yep. 32 states do not. Yep, and Representative Eggleston sent this to us right before we came down, and this is the breakdown. We got it was distributed to the committee last year while we were talking about it. He just sent it, and we will send it. We will forward this to everyone in the committee, but 32 do not.
That's amazing.
So, any other questions? Lady, thank you very much for coming.
Right. Thank you very much.
Anyone else testify or bear witness on initiative petitions? And the room has gotten quiet. I want to remind everyone that we will have a meeting on September 14th at 10 o'clock, I believe in the same room. During deliberations today, it's come to our attention we would have to have an in-person meeting and in-person voting to adopt the rules to allow Zoom testimony at the following meeting. So unless many of you want to come back and have an in-person meeting, there will not be Zoom capabilities at the September 14th. So if you have a strong desire to include that, we will have to have a meeting before that. And from the chair's position, trying to schedule time, all of us to get in here before September 14th may be a challenge, but if you want to try to pull that off, we will be more than happy to work with you. So, Representative Wyndham.
Do you recall what time we're meeting on September 14th?
I believe it's 10 o'clock.
So do we have to be noticed up 24 hours before their meeting, or is it just any time before their meeting? If it's any time before the meeting, then why not have a meeting 30 minutes before the meeting to?
We'd have to be noticed up
24 hours ahead.
Right.
Well, does it have to? We can still be noticed up 24 hours ahead. Does it have to be a gap there? You get what I'm
Yes,
saying?
because there's a 48-hour notice to let me. Yeah. So we'll address. Let's continue to think about this, and we'll go forward. But if anybody wants to testify in person, we'll be mainly dealing with photo ID on that day.